Nathan had perfected the art of being present without existing. The Galactic Assembly Hall was built to make existence unavoidable. Layered balconies floating in calibrated gravity fields, translucent walls holding back incompatible atmospheres, and a ceiling so high it displayed a rotating star map just to remind everyone how small they were. Yet Nathan sat in the back row, where the translation lag was half a second slower, and the chairs had been recycled from a previous civilization's budget crisis. As a diplomatic observer, his job was to watch history happen and make notes about it afterward, preferably without influencing anything. He liked to think of himself as furniture with opinions. The session was proceeding exactly as expected. A silicon-based trade envoy was delivering a speech that had already been delivered in 5 other halls this year, only with different metaphors involving pressure and erosion. Nathan listened with one ear while his personal console quietly summarized it into 3 bullet points and 1 sarcastic footnote. Around him, delegates murmured, blinked, pulsed, or shed politely, depending on their biology. Somewhere to his left, a representative from a low-gravity moon was struggling heroically with a chair that refused to acknowledge their bone density. Nathan admired the commitment. The assembly loved ceremony. Every word spoken in the hall was wrapped in protocol like fragile cargo, and moving incorrectly could cause a diplomatic incident or, in rare cases, a minor war. Nathan had once watched 2 ambassadors argue for 40 minutes about whether a pause had been respectful or threatening. Today promised to be calmer. He had already labeled the session in his notes as predictable, which was dangerous but satisfying. He leaned back, letting the ambient hum of life support systems and translation fields blur together. Above, the star map shifted to reflect a minor realignment of nearby systems, something no one in the room would ever vote on, but everyone pretended mattered. Nathan wondered, not for the first time, how many civilizations had collapsed while their leaders were busy applauding at the wrong time. That was when the main doors opened. They did not slide open with ceremonial grace. They burst hard enough to make several security drones swivel in alarm and 1 elderly delegate release a defensive spore cloud. The sound echoed through the hall like a dropped instrument. Conversation stopped. The star map dimmed slightly as if unsure whether this was still part of the program. Someone ran in. Running was not a sanctioned assembly behavior. Walking briskly was already frowned upon. This was running with intent. Fabric moving too fast for tradition. Long ears streaming back instead of being held in dignified stillness. Guards reacted a heartbeat too late, caught between training and disbelief. The figure ignored them completely, weaving past dignitaries, leaping a low barrier that had once cost 6 committees to approve. Nathan straightened without knowing why. His console helpfully highlighted the intruder's rank as catastrophic. She crossed the hall with alarming speed, eyes scanning rows of faces as if searching for something misplaced. Nathan had time to think, distantly, that this was either a coup or a misunderstanding of epic proportions. He considered ducking. The chair did not cooperate. She stopped directly in front of him. For a moment, Nathan's universe shrank to a pair of unfamiliar eyes and the faint smell of ionized air. Then she smiled, wide and unrestrained, and before he could stand or protest or remember his own name, she grabbed him and pulled him into a fierce embrace. "My friend," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, translated into a dozen languages with varying degrees of panic. The room froze. Nathan's first thought was that this was a mistake. His second was that he should have taken that reassignment. His third, arriving late and unhelpful, was that she looked genuinely happy. Around them, shock rippled outward. Some delegates applauded reflexively, others stared in horror, and at least one fainted in a way that suggested training. Nathan stood there, arms half raised, mind racing to locate any memory that explained why an alien queen with long ears had just claimed him in front of the galaxy. All he found was a distant echo of chaos, dust, and 2 days he had never expected to matter. The silence after her declaration had weight. It pressed against Nathan's ears until even the translation field seemed to hesitate, as if unsure how to render collective shock. He was still trapped in the embrace, which was firm in a way that suggested she had learned it somewhere decidedly unroyal. His observer badge flickered between identities, attempting to decide whether he was a threat, an asset, or furniture that had become sentient. Security arrived in layers. Drones first, then guards in ceremonial armor designed to look intimidating without restricting movement, which meant they all looked mildly annoyed. One of them cleared his throat in a way that clearly required authorization. "Your Majesty," he said with a bow that nearly collided with a hovering delegate. "Protocol." She released Nathan just long enough to look at the guard with calm curiosity. "Is taking too long," she said, and then turned back to Nathan as if the hall had ceased to exist. "You look thinner." Thank you," Nathan said. His voice echoed far louder than intended. Somewhere, a recording system flagged his tone as historically inadequate. Hands took his arms gently but insistently. Not arrest, not quite escort. Protective containment. His console helpfully labeled it. He was guided forward, away from his seat, away from the back row he had cultivated like a safe habitat. As they moved, he caught glimpses of faces, some angry, some calculating, some openly amused. A reptilian envoy gave him a slow thumbs up with a clawed hand. Nathan wasn't sure which species that gesture insulted. They ushered him into a side chamber that shimmered into solidity the moment the doors sealed. The room adjusted to him. Gravity eased, air composition normalized, a chair unfolded from the wall like an apologetic animal. Nathan sat because standing felt like a poor life choice. Moments later, she entered. Without the distance of the hall, it was easier to see her properly. She looked remarkably human, aside from the long ears that curved back elegantly and twitched when she focused. No crown now, no visible weapons, just practical clothing woven with faint circuitry that pulsed softly, like it was listening. She studied him with the same intensity he remembered from somewhere he hadn't yet placed. "You still hesitate before sitting," she said. "You did that before." Nathan blinked. "I did." "Yes. Chairs that look expensive make you suspicious." She smiled. It was endearing. His memory shifted, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Dust, alarms, a collapsing habitat ring, a woman with the same eyes arguing with a local official while rerouting supplies behind his back. He felt a laugh escape him, short and incredulous. "That was you," he said. She inclined her head. "You did not know my name then." "I didn't know anyone's name," Nathan said. "That was sort of the point." She laughed at that, a sound far less restrained than the one she used in public. "Yes, you were very committed to being unremarkable. It made you difficult to find." "I've been practicing," he said. "For years." Her expression softened, just slightly. "I remembered you immediately. You argued with me about evacuation priorities." "You were wrong," Nathan said automatically, then winced. "Old habits." She brightened. "You told me that too." A pause settled between them, heavier than before, but warmer. Outside the chamber, the assembly undoubtedly dissolved into committees and accusations. Inside, time stretched. "In my culture," she said gently, "friendship is not casual. Declaring it publicly binds protection and obligation. I have given you status you did not ask for." Nathan rubbed his face. "That tracks. Most things that happen to me do." She tilted her head. "You are displeased?" "I'm confused," and he said, "and fairly certain my supervisors are composing messages that will age them prematurely." Her ears flicked in what he suspected was amusement. "Good. It means they are paying attention." Nathan exhaled slowly. He looked at her, at the queen he barely knew, the woman he remembered vividly, the friend he apparently was, and realized something uncomfortable and undeniable. The back row of the universe had just ended. Memory returned to Nathan in fragments, the way disaster always did. It never arrived as a clean sequence, only as sensations that refused to stay buried. The faint vibration beneath his feet as a station's gravity system argued with itself, the smell of overheated polymers, the particular silence that followed a broadcast no one wanted to make. Sitting in the quiet chamber now with walls that politely pretended not to listen, he felt the past press forward until resisting it seemed impolite. 3 years ago, the border colony had not been on any important map. It existed in the administrative margins, a place where jurisdiction blurred and responsibility evaporated. Nathan had been sent there because he was good at untangling logistics without asking why they were tangled in the first place. He arrived with a tablet full of supply routes and a firm belief that if you move food fast enough, people would stop dying long enough to complain. The station had been failing when he arrived. Not dramatically, not yet. Just enough flicker in the lights to make everyone uneasy, and enough structural warnings to be ignored by anyone with authority. Refugees crowded corridors designed for half their number. Automated med units rolled past with blinking apologies. Nathan spent his first hour rerouting water shipments, and his second hour explaining to 3 different officials why arguing over insignia placement was not triage. That was when he met her. She had been standing on an overturned cargo crate, long ears unmistakable even under a hood meant to disguise them, directing people with a calm voice that carried farther than it should have. He noticed her because she was doing something no one else was doing, listening, not just to words but to patterns, to fear, to who was lying badly and who was telling the truth because they were too tired to invent one. "You can't send them to Section C," she said, dropping down from the crate beside him without introduction. "The life support there will fail within 12 hours. Nathan glanced at his tablet. "According to this, Section C is stable." She smiled without humor. "According to my data, it is pretending." He stared at her for a moment, then sighed and rewrote the routes. "If this goes wrong, I'll deny we ever spoke." "Excellent," she said. "That was my plan as well." They worked like that for 2 days. No names, no ranks, just overlapping fields of competence and mutual irritation at anyone who slowed them down. When traffickers tried to move people under the cover of evacuation, she noticed before the security systems did. When a hospital wing lost power, he found a way to steal it back from a diplomatic suite whose occupants never noticed the dimming lights. They argued constantly about priorities, about ethics, about whether sarcasm counted as a coping mechanism. At one point, while crouched behind a barricade waiting for a riot to burn itself out, she had looked at him and said, "You do not optimize for influence." "I optimize for survival," he replied. "Influence is a hobby." She laughed then, a short sound edged with surprise, as if she hadn't expected that answer from someone who looked like he belonged behind a desk. He noticed absurdly that her ears twitched when she was amused. When the crisis ended, it ended badly but survivably, which everyone agreed was a victory. Aid ships arrived late, reports were rewritten, responsibility migrated upward and disappeared. Nathan prepared to leave with nothing but exhaustion and the vague satisfaction of having done something that would not be remembered. They stood together in a corridor that had finally gone quiet. "We will not meet again," she said. Not sadly, just accurately. "Statistically unlikely," Nathan agreed. "I don't even know your name." She considered him for a moment. "Then remember what you did instead." He had shrugged, because he always did, and walked away without looking back. Now, years later, sitting across from her as alarms and politics raged beyond the walls, Nathan let out a slow breath. "I honestly thought you forgot me." She shook her head. "I thought of you often. You chose people no one was watching." "I was watching," he said. "Yes," she replied softly. "That is why." The memory settled, complete at last. Nathan leaned back and gave a tired smile. "I still don't optimize for influence." Her return smile was sharp and warm all at once. "You will," she said, "but only accidentally." Somewhere outside, the galaxy reorganized itself around a friendship neither of them had planned, and for the first time, Nathan did not feel the need to disappear. Nathan discovered that panic could, in fact, be postponed. It did not vanish. It sat politely in the back of his mind like an overworked assistant holding a clipboard, waiting for the appropriate moment to scream. For now, it was content to let him breathe. The chamber adjusted again, sensing prolonged occupancy. The walls dimmed to a neutral hue calculated to reduce stress across 87 known species. Nathan suspected it had never been calibrated for humans who had just been publicly claimed by an alien monarch. Lyrana moved first, not with urgency but with purpose. She circled the room slowly, her long ears tilting now and then, as if listening to things Nathan could not hear. Data flowed along the faint lines in her clothing, reacting to her presence, to the security fields beyond the walls, to the sudden spike in attention centered on one very confused observer. "You should ask," she said. Nathan looked up. Ask what? Why I did it, she replied. Out there. Like that. He snorted before he could stop himself. I have a list. It's alphabetized. She smiled, but there was steel under it. Begin anywhere. He leaned back in the chair, which immediately reshaped itself to look less expensive. All right. Why would a reigning queen violate half a millennium of protocol to hug a man whose official contribution to the assembly is taking notes no one reads? Lorana stopped in front of him. Because the notes matter more than the speeches. That feels dangerously flattering. It is dangerously accurate. She took the opposite seat, the room subtly realigning to place them at equal height. Nathan noticed the detail and filed it away under things he would unpack later, probably at an inconvenient time. In my world, she said, friendship is not emotional decoration. It is a declaration of trust made visible. To name someone publicly is to bind yourself to them. It grants protection, yes, but also scrutiny. I have placed you under my authority. Nathan winced. You could have sent a message. I did, she said calmly, for 3 years, in ways you never noticed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Of course you did. She leaned forward slightly. You avoided advancement. You transferred departments. You declined invitations that would have made you visible. You are very difficult to corner. I call it a lifestyle choice. Her ears flicked. I call it fear. That landed closer than he liked. Nathan cleared his throat. I call it self-preservation. Influence has a way of getting people killed. Yes, she said. That is why I need someone who does not seek it. Outside the chamber, a low vibration passed through the walls as the assembly reorganized itself in response to the disruption. Committees were forming. Accusations were being drafted. Somewhere, an algorithm was recalculating Nathan's projected lifespan. So what happens now, he asked. Do I get a ceremonial robe? A bodyguard? A ceremonial bodyguard in a robe? She laughed outright at that. No, you get access. That sounds worse. It often is. She explained it without drama, which somehow made it heavier. He would be permitted in councils normally closed to observers. His presence would be noted, his words recorded. He would be protected from retaliation by formal decree, which would immediately inspire informal resentment. The galaxy, she said, had an extraordinary talent for punishing those who did not understand they were playing a game. Nathan listened, nodding slowly. And all this, he said, because 3 years ago, I moved food instead of favors. Yes, and because I annoyed you. That helped. He smiled despite himself. You realize my superiors are going to be furious. They are already confused, she replied. Fury will follow. It always does. There was a pause softer than the others. Lorana's expression shifted, just a fraction, the weight of her role pressing through the calm exterior. I am surrounded, she said quietly, by advisors who are very good at telling me what will preserve power. None of them are good at telling me what is right. You were, and you did it without knowing who I was. Nathan looked at her then, really looked. Not the queen, not the symbol, but the woman with long ears who had stood on a crate in a collapsing station and listened when no one else did. I didn't know you were royalty, he said. If I had, you would have been careful, she finished, and I would have learned nothing. The panic in the back of his mind shifted, crossed something off its list. Well, he said, exhaling, this is inconvenient. Yes, she agreed warmly. That is how change usually begins. The chamber lights brightened slightly as a message request pulsed against the security field. The galaxy, it seemed, was done waiting. Nathan stood, straightening his jacket, feeling the unfamiliar weight of being seen. All right, he said, let's go disappoint some very powerful people. Lyrana rose with him, her smile sharp and unmistakably pleased. The first thing Nathan learned about access was that it came with seating. Not better seating, worse seating. Seats close enough to power that you could feel the heat, but far enough away that if something exploded, no one would admit you had been there. The council chamber Lorana brought him into was smaller than the assembly hall, but infinitely more dangerous. Its walls were layered with adaptive shielding, its table grown, rather than built, shaped from a bioengineered material that responded to stress by becoming harder. Nathan suspected this was symbolic. The council members were already assembled. They represented worlds whose stars burned at different temperatures, whose histories measured time in incompatible units. Some wore ceremonial garments heavy with meaning. Others wore nothing at all, relying on subtle force fields to imply dignity. All of them looked at Nathan as if he were a clerical error that had learned to speak. "This is the observer," one of them said, voice filtered through a translation matrix that added unnecessary gravitas. "The one you named." "Yes," Lorana replied. "Nathan." Nathan lifted a hand in a small, polite wave. It was ignored by everyone except a floating intelligence core that blinked green in what he chose to interpret as encouragement. "You are not qualified," another counselor said flatly. "I agree," Nathan said. "I've been saying that for years." That earned him exactly one surprise blink. Lorana took her seat at the head of the table, the room subtly reorienting itself around her. Nathan noticed that the chair beside her had already adapted to his physiology. Someone had planned this. He made a mental note to be wary of furniture. "This council will proceed," Lorana said, "with my friend present." The word landed like a dropped tool. Nathan felt it immediately, not emotionally, but technologically. Security fields shifted. His console updated with new permissions he absolutely did not want to examine too closely. Somewhere a reputation engine screamed. The discussion began as councils always did, with abstraction, trade corridors, resource stabilization, border realignments described as if borders were cooperative objects. Nathan listened, his old observer instincts kicking in, cataloging the gaps between what was said and what was meant. He noticed how often people avoided looking at Lorana when they proposed solutions that would harm populations without voices. At one point, a projection displayed casualty estimates with soothing color gradients. Nathan raised his hand. Several counselors reacted as if gravity had briefly malfunctioned. "Yes," Lorana said calmly. He cleared his throat. "Those projections assume compliance." "They assume inevitability," someone corrected. "Same mistake," Nathan said. "People don't behave like math unless you force them to. And then they behave worse." Silence followed, broken only by the soft recalibration of the table. "That observer has no standing," a counselor snapped. "He has experience," Lorana replied, "which you are welcome to dispute." Nathan leaned back slightly. "For the record, I would also like to dispute my experience. It keeps finding me." The floating intelligence core blinked again, this time blue. As the session continued, Nathan found himself speaking more than intended, not because he wanted to influence outcomes, but because no one else seemed willing to say obvious things. That relocating entire populations required trust, not just transport. That predictive AIs trained on political data consistently underestimated desperation. That starving people did not read policy briefings. Each time he spoke, Lorana listened. Each time she listened, someone else grew visibly irritated. By the end of the session, Nathan had acquired enemies without ever learning their names. He also acquired an escort. The escort was polite, well-armed, and clearly instructed not to let him wander into vents again, which Nathan took as evidence of a colorful briefing. They accompanied him through corridors that shifted as he walked, architecture responding to rank fluctuations like a nervous system. "Am I in danger?" Nathan asked conversationally. "Yes," the escort replied cheerfully. "That's refreshingly honest." They stopped at a balcony overlooking the assembly hall. Below, delegates moved like schools of thought given physical form. Lorana joined him moments later, her presence causing nearby systems to settle, as if relieved. "You did well," she said. "I annoyed everyone," he replied. "That's usually a sign I missed something." She smiled. "You reminded them of something. That they're wrong? That people exist." Nathan watched the hall below. "This is the part where I ask how bad it's going to get." Lorana stood beside him, long ears still, eyes forward. "Very," she said. "Eventually." He nodded. "Good. I was worried this would be easy." She glanced at him, amusement flickering. "You could still leave." He considered it. The back row, the slow fade, the safety of being unseen. Instead, he shrugged. "I hate wasted access." Lorena's smile this time was quiet, dangerous, and grateful all at once. Visibility, Nathan learned, was not a single moment, but a condition. It followed him like a mild gravitational anomaly, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. Doors opened a fraction faster. Conversations paused when he entered a room. Not because he was important, but because people were recalculating. He had become a variable, and bureaucracies hated variables. The first real consequence arrived disguised as a courtesy. It was an invitation, encoded in 6 languages and 3 diplomatic encryption standards, requesting his presence at a strategic subcommittee breakfast. Breakfast was always a warning. Nathan stared at the message while his personal console tried to estimate the odds of poisoning and gave up halfway through. He arrived early out of habit. The room was circular, suspended above a slow-turning view of the planet below, its surface traced with weather systems and city lights like a living diagram. The table was set with nutrient options calibrated to species present. Someone had added a human-specific option labeled comfort food, which turned out to be eggs that tasted like regret. The others arrived in clusters, confidence thick enough to smell. They spoke to him politely, vaguely, the way one speaks to a structural beam that has begun offering opinions. Nathan responded with the same courtesy he always used, which was to say exactly what he meant and assume everyone else was exaggerating. "So," one delegate said, folding multiple hands together, "you advise Her Majesty now." "I don't advise," Nathan replied. "I comment, sometimes loudly." A few smiles appeared, tight and strategic. They began discussing a border stabilization plan that involved predictive war simulations and autonomous deterrent fleets. The projections looked clean, too clean. Nathan watched casualty estimates shrink with every algorithmic refinement, humanity edited out by efficiency. "This assumes no panic," he said finally. One of them sighed. "Fear can be managed." "Not by spreadsheets," Nathan said. "I've tried." The tension rose, the kind that hummed just below polite speech. Someone invoked necessity. Someone else invoked precedent. Nathan invoked lived experience, which was apparently not a recognized metric. When Lorana entered, the room recalibrated instantly. Conversations adjusted their tone. Spines straightened. Nathan noticed the relief he felt and resented it immediately. She listened as the plan was presented again, this time with more reverence. When it ended, she turned to Nathan. "Your thoughts?" He hesitated, not because he lacked them, but because he was suddenly aware of the cost of saying them. The weight of being seen pressed down, unfamiliar and uncomfortable. "It will work," he said slowly. "On paper. In practice, it will create resentment that outlives the conflict. You'll win stability and lose trust." Silence followed. Lorana nodded once. "That matches my concern." The room cooled. Not emotionally, technologically. Privacy fields tightened. Someone looked at Nathan with something like open hostility. Afterward, alone in a transit corridor that shifted direction based on traffic and mood, Nathan stopped walking. "This is getting harder," he said. Lorana paused beside him. "Yes. You're asking me to say things that make powerful people angry. I am asking you to say what you see," he exhaled. "Those are often the same thing." She studied him, long ears still, expression unreadable. "You are not obligated to continue." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." They stood there longer than protocol allowed. The corridor gently rerouted around them, annoyed. "I don't want to be responsible," Nathan said finally. "I'm good at pointing out problems. I'm terrible at owning outcomes." "You already do," she replied. "You just pretend you don't." That stung more than the council ever had. Later, alone in his assigned quarters, too large, too quiet, Nathan replayed the day, the faces, the reactions, the way decisions bent slightly when he spoke. Humor had always been his shield, but shields did not stop gravity. His console chimed with a message flagged as urgent and deeply unfortunate. A coalition of minor powers had formally protested his influence. Another had requested his removal. A third wanted to meet him privately, which felt worse than both. He laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I used to be invisible," he told the room. The room, loyal but unhelpful, did not respond. When sleep finally came, it was restless. Dreams of collapsing stations and council tables that grew teeth, of long ears twitching in amusement and warning. By morning, Nathan understood something he had been avoiding. Observation was no longer neutral, and friendship, it turned out, was heavier than any title he had never wanted. The last meeting Nathan attended as an observer was, technically, not a meeting for observers. It took place in a chamber that did not appear on any public map, its location shifting slightly in relation to the station's core so that no two visits aligned the same way. The walls were bare, the air neutral, the technology discreet in the way that suggested immense expense. This was where things were decided when speeches had failed and committees had exhausted themselves. Nathan stood near the table, not behind it. That alone felt like a conclusion. The coalition that had protested his presence was represented here, along with those who had attempted to remove him and those who had quietly adjusted their policies after listening to him and never admitted why. Lorana sat at the head of the table, crown absent, authority intact. Her long ears were still, a sign Nathan had learned meant she was listening far more than she was reacting. The matter at hand was the border stabilization plan, revised, amended, argued into something resembling humility. The autonomous deterrent fleets had been scaled back. The relocation models now included human behavior modifiers that were messy and inefficient, and, according to the simulations, far more accurate. Aid corridors were protected not by threat matrices, but by shared governance structures that no algorithm liked because they could not be controlled. Someone cleared their throat. This compromise weakens our position. Nathan spoke before thinking, which was new. It humanizes it, he said, or the equivalent, depending on your biology. A few groans followed. One chuckle. Progress. They voted, not unanimously, never that, but decisively enough to matter. When it was over, the chamber relaxed. Privacy fields dropped. The galaxy, temporarily, had decided not to tear itself apart. Lorana turned to Nathan. You have fulfilled your role. He raised an eyebrow. I had a role? Yes, she said. You were honest when it was inconvenient. He considered that. I should put it on my resume. The meeting dissolved in fragments of motion and quiet recalculation. Nathan found himself alone with Lorana as the chamber shifted back into anonymity. You are free to return to observation, she said. The offer was genuine. He could hear it in her voice. Nathan looked around the empty room, then laughed softly. I don't think I could unsee things now. Her ears flicked, just once. No, you could not. They walked together through corridors that no longer adjusted nervously to his presence. He noticed the difference and smiled at it. Visibility, it seemed, could learn. I never wanted influence, he said. I know, she replied. That is why I trusted you. They stopped at a balcony overlooking the assembly hall. It looked the same as it always had, vast, ornate, full of species pretending to agree. Nathan spotted the back row easily. His old seat was occupied by someone younger, already cultivating invisibility with impressive dedication. Do you regret it? Lorana asked. He watched the hall for a long moment. No, he said finally, but I do miss being underestimated. She smiled. That too is temporary. His console chimed softly, a message from his superiors. Brief, begrudging, accepting. He had been reassigned, not promoted, repositioned, a liaison role that did not exist until it needed him. Purpose, it turned out, could be bureaucratic. What will you do? He asked her. Lorana looked out over the hall, her reflection fractured in the glass. Continue, she said, with fewer illusions. They stood there in companionable silence, the kind built from shared chaos and mutual refusal to look away. You know, Nathan said, for a friendship that started with moving crates and arguing about priorities, this escalated quickly. Yes, she agreed dryly. Next time we should simply have tea. He laughed, and this time the sound carried without echo, without amplification, just a human sound in a galactic space that had learned to make room for it. When he finally left the balcony, Nathan did not look back at the back row. The universe was still large, still absurd, still dangerously fond of ceremony. But it now contained a place where decency had weight, where friendship could be declared without apology, and where a man who once tried very hard